Last 24 hours, I've traveled to the south of Israel, and now we're in the West Bank. And I can tell you that on the front lines of Gaza, even though a ground operation is not happening, the devastation wrought by the Hamas terrorist group is writ large. I visited some of the worst affected areas to bring you these reports. I'm standing here on the threshold of Jenin. It's a city in the West Bank. The roadside behind you tells you which direction it is, and that is the West Bank. We're the first Indian crew right here at the doorstep of Jenin, which we're going to try and get into. But I want to tell you a little bit more about Jenin at this point of time. This is a place that has been struck by an airstrike just a couple of days ago for only the second time in over 2 decades. Now, the West Bank, much of which is under Israeli administration, has pockets under the Palestinian Authority. Jenin has been conspicuously notorious through the entire history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, Jenin is not only a place that has been struck by an airstrike where the Al-Ansar Mosque, just about a couple of kilometers in that direction, that's Jenin you see right there, in that direction is where the airstrike took place, but it's also a place where more airstrikes will happen. I spoke a couple of days ago to one of the lead spokespersons of the Israeli Defense Forces, and this entire territory is still under Israel, and they say more airstrikes might happen. The difference between Gaza and Jenin is that Gaza is under Hamas, Jenin is under a political party called Fatah, which is a rival party of the Hamas. Now, the Fatah, which constitutes the Palestinian Authority, has not been able to exercise much control over what happens in this part of the West Bank, which is the northern part of the West Bank in Jenin, which has this refugee camp, which was finally struck in that airstrike. This particular airstrike takes place on the Al-Ansar Mosque because, incredibly, Israel believes that plans were afoot by an emboldened Hamas to conduct a similar terrorist attack from Jenin on Israeli territory using the same kinds of resources, paragliders, rockets, missiles, that kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons why they took the difficult decision to conduct an airstrike in Jenin. Jenin has many different names. Among Palestinians, it's called the Martyrs' Capital. Among Israelis, it's called the Hornet's Nest because it has been a bedrock and a haven for many of the extremist groups among the Palestinians, including the Al-Quds, which is the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Jenin is also home to the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is the military faction of the Fatah political party. But 2023 has actually seen much more happening in Jenin. It's a place where the Israeli Defense Forces don't like to venture in because it's very much like Gaza. It's a heavily populated area. As you can see, even from this distance, Jenin is a pretty crowded area. Somewhere right above that hill is the refugee camp as well, and it's a difficult place to administer, and that's the reason why the Israel Defense Forces have very rarely gone inside Jenin. But earlier this year, we did see some fighting taking place where there were a lot of casualties. Last year, an Al Jazeera journalist was famously shot dead in what became a global controversy as well. So Jenin continues to be a hot spot. It's over 70 years old. It's one of the first refugee camps that came up, but it continues to be a hot spot as far as terror against Israel is concerned. In Jenin, in the West Bank, Shivarur for India Today. As the first journalist on the threshold of Jenin, India Today has been told that we are just about 1.5 kilometers from where that airstrike took place on Sunday morning. The Al-Ansar Mosque was struck, and not many people know that Jenin is considered the second most restive Palestinian territory after Gaza. And it was from here that the Hamas was expected to launch perhaps another strike, opening another front against Israel. And that's why, breaking many years of tradition, Israel decided to conduct an airstrike in the West Bank at the Jenin refugee camp.
Amid the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, Israel opened a fresh front in its offensive. In a major escalation, Israeli forces carried out their first major airstrike in the West Bank. Israel struck a compound beneath Al-Ansar Mosque in the West Bank's Jenin, killing at least one person. The Israeli forces said the mosque conceals terror cells of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The terror groups have been using the mosque as a command center to plan terror attacks.
Based on specific intelligence inputs, the Israeli forces mounted an airstrike even in the West Bank, targeting the Al-Ansar Mosque, saying Hamas terrorists were not just hiding in the mosque, but were also storing weapons for an imminent attack on Israeli civilians.
As the war reaches the West Bank, so far dozens of Palestinian radicals in West Bank have been killed in clashes with Israeli forces.
Israel's airstrike on the Al-Ansar Mosque in the West Bank shows that the beast has woken and it's going to go after every single asset of the Hamas. A hyper-alert intelligence is going to make sure that Operation Swords of Iron is not going to stop at anything whatsoever. And this also means that two big fronts are now completely open.
The West Bank strikes come after Israel conducted multiple raids in the region, arresting hundreds of Hamas workers and seizing massive cache of arms and ammunition aimed at attacking Israel. With Gaurav Sawant and Shiv Arur from Israel, Bureau Report, India Today.
The Jenin refugee camp has a particularly notorious reputation in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It was started in 1953, and since then it has proven to be a haven for many of the most extremist Palestinian groups and the military wings of mainstream Palestinian political parties. But 2023 has meant that Hamas, unlike the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which already have a firm foundation in Jenin, the Hamas has recently found greater strength within a territory that was thus far not very friendly to it. And that's the reason why Jenin holds an extremely significant place in the history of this conflict, and this time as well.
Jenin, a small city north of the West Bank, contains a teeming refugee camp that shelters more than 24,000 people. Most of the inhabitants of Jenin refugee camp are descendants of Palestinians dispossessed when Israel was created in 1948. Most are impoverished and unemployed. Jenin produced many of the suicide bombers who spearheaded the Intifada or uprising against Israel. The city witnessed some of the worst bloodshed during the Second Intifada, which began after the collapse of US-backed peace talks in 2000. In 2002, the army besieged the camp for more than a month amid fierce fighting that killed 52 Palestinians and 23 Israeli soldiers. 2 decades on, amid the escalating war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Israel says the Jenin camp is still a hub for planning and preparing of terror attacks. Tel Aviv claims the Jenin refugee camp is a safe haven for fighters funded by Hamas. Al-Ansar Mosque, bombed by Israeli Defense Forces, is one such hideout, according to Tel Aviv. Bureau Report, India Today.